Welcome to Ithaca Politics. For our maiden voyage, we're going to take a detour away from Ithaca to talk about Ukraine, the war, and how it affects us globally and locally. First off, we have a video of a memorial service in Binghamton, New York, that commemorates the 3rd anniversary of the war.
Things are not really getting better for Ukraine, not getting better for our country, not getting better for our people. Fight is still going on. Ukraine is
holy and immortal, have mercy on us. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, now and
Ukraine is really unsafe because all the rocket attacks, and it's you don't really know where it's gonna go next time, if it could be in your house or something else, and it's really scary out there.
Them, O Holy One, for the sake of your name. Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. Glory be to the Father.
It's quite clear that our president now is nothing but a puppet to Putin. And I don't know what kind of information Putin must have on Trump to keep him quiet and to keep him following orders. But it's a total disgrace to our country. And I feel shame. I feel outright shame that he's the current president and that he's betraying everything that this country stands for.
Transgressions, O Master, look upon our weaknesses and heal them, O Holy One, for the sake
Marco
of
Rubio
your name.
and Lavrov are talking about expanding presence in Moscow and in Washington at the expense of the Ukrainian people and the expense of our country and our allies in Europe. So it was a very, very difficult, concerning period in the history of America and also Ukraine. After fighting for 3 years, now not to know whether America is going to stand with them and with NATO is very disconcerting.
America doesn't benefit from having Russia march across Europe. America benefits and is strongest when we stand strong and proud with our allies. That's what I'll do, and that's what we need more folks in Washington, D.C. to do.
After the memorial, organizers of Stand for Ukraine retreated from the cold to Atomic Tom's Cafe, where they feasted on local culture. A few people spoke about a recent interaction between President Zelensky and President Trump.
So if you look at the border between west of the border, where it's still Ukrainian territory, and east of the border, where it's Russian territory, it's extremely different. In Ukraine, you have freedom of speech. You have freedom of religion. You have freedom of movement. If you go on the eastern side of the border, if they find anything in Ukrainian or any kind of political information on your phone, you will be tortured and put in prison. If you were elected to office in Ukraine and they catch you on the right-hand side of the border, they will put you in prison and will torture you. They also torture Christians in the occupied areas. They take Ukrainian children and they send them to Russia and re-educate them to hate their homeland. So where that border is really does make a difference. And if you look at Russia historically, you have a problem where you have oligarchs controlling the media and controlling the government. What concerns me greatly as an individual is seeing some of these dangerous patterns slipping in here in our own home country. And so what I really want is when we stand for freedom, justice, and democracy in Ukraine, that we also continue to stand for freedom, justice, and democracy here in the United States.
For me, as a Ukrainian who came to the U.S. technically since 2019, but I moved here in 2022. Actually, I was in a plane coming here just right when the war started. It was a little bit surreal to me. And, I just feel the perspective a little bit different, more personally, because all my family is back there. I'm the only person here. And for me, just hearing those cruel words have been very challenging, because I hear words from my family members, from people who are fighting about everything that is going on. And hearing that, Ukraine is at fault, at war, is ridiculous. You have a person, you have a country invading another country, you have totalitarian regime invading democracy, and democracy is being blamed by defending their own country. It's very heartbreaking. It's extremely difficult to explain to other people because people are hearing what is happening in the news. And for us as an organization, it's really important to spread the word that the word has to come out that Ukraine is not at fault. Ukraine is a country which defends itself. It's a democracy. We have democratic elections every 5 years. My uncle is right now fighting in the war. And I'm going to tell you that, obviously I cannot speak a lot about what he's doing. However, the Ukrainians are enraged. They're really, I don't even know how to explain it. When someone is calling your country to be at fault at war where we are protecting ourselves, it has been a very difficult situation. And there is a lot of, I would say, pessimistic moods right now. But people still will be fighting. They're protecting their country. They still will be fighting. They're fighting for their own freedom and survival. So they're not happy. They're not happy with what has been said and done in the past few weeks.
My mom lives in Ukraine currently. And when I talked to her, she said people of Ukraine are gathering and supporting President Zelensky even more than before, after what's happening here. So people in Ukraine supporting their president. And even if they decide to hold the vote, I feel like he's going to be chosen to be a president again. So I know that war is going on, and every effort should be for supporting our Ukrainian troops, but at the same time, we should make sure that Russian propaganda is not going to spread around in this, in our area or in Washington, D.C., for our political leaders. That's our job to make sure that the Russian, because I lived under that and I know how it all works. And I feel like that's why we are here, to make sure that's not going to spread around.
Ні слава, ні воля, ще нам, браття українці, усміхнеться доля. Згинуть наші вороженьки, як роса на сонці, запануєм і ми, браття, у своїй сторонці, душу, тіло ми положимо.
I'm happy to introduce our first guest, Mayor of Ithaca, Robert Cantelmo. But before we start talking, Mayor, I'd like us to play a clip of you introducing the Ukrainian band Commemoration when they played in Ithaca last summer.
Also know that your visit strengthens our already historic bonds of friendship. From the Black Sea up the Dnieper River to our sister city, Horishny Plavny, we keep our Ukrainian brothers and sisters in our hearts. I look forward to the day when I can visit a Ukraine that again knows peace. So thank you very much for your visit, and Slava Ukraini.
Horishny Plavny, Ithaca's sister city. Do you know how people are doing? How they fared since the war broke out?
We do not have official contact with the city at this time, largely because of the disruptions that occurred during the initial invasion. We are eager to restore those municipal relationships once we see a little bit more stability and peace in the region. But I can say that in my previous work in democracy, human rights, and governance, I've had occasion to know many individuals working and living in Ukraine who are involved in the resistance, and mostly out in Lviv or Kyiv, But we know that folks are persevering and they're trying to remain as optimistic as possible despite some of the setbacks that we've seen, unfortunately, effectuated by this current administration. We have a federal administration now that seems to believe that our allies and partners in Europe and elsewhere around the world are less valuable than bipartisan policy has shown for the last several decades. We have a president who thinks it's more important to praise folks like Russian President and dictator Vladimir Putin or Viktor Orban, strongman in Hungary, than it is to work with someone like Volodymyr Zelensky, who has done a Herculean effort to try and keep his country safe. While there are, again, sort of grim developments of late, I would say that the Ukrainian people need to know that the American people are with them, even if those values are not always reflected by the occupant of the Oval Office at this time.
Mm-hmm. Let's bring it back to Ithaca and just in general, why would a small town in America really be concerned with the events that are off, a very far off land?
I mean, it's a great question, right? I mean, I think it's something that folks at first blush might find themselves asking, and it's really important to interrogate that because there are sort of, I think, concrete material reasons that we should care about the conflict, as well as values-based reasons, right? I mean, the fact of the matter is disruption of the Ukrainian grain market is having a significant impact on the cost of commodities. And because we live in an interconnected global economy, those things are not isolated to regions where there is conflict. There are knock-on effects in the markets that receive those goods, and that includes our grocery stores and our kitchen tables and our pocketbooks. Furthermore, we see disruption of energy trade, and the price of energy is something that is acutely felt by consumers at the local level here. Again, just because our energy might be developed in a different country doesn't mean that that global supply isn't ultimately impacting the cost. But I also think that there's important questions that we need to think about. Do we really want to incentivize and reward imperial expansionism on Europe's borders? I mean, Europe is our largest trading region. The fact of the matter is we're dealing with an increasingly autocratic regime in Moscow and its satellites in the region. All of these things threaten to disrupt the sort of liberal international order that we've stood by for the last 70, 80 years. And then there's the values question, right? At the end of the day, do we want to be associated with turning our backs on the men and women who are trying to model their own struggle off of efforts for self-determination and liberation that we've experienced and that our allies have experienced around the world and across history? And I think for me, it's a simple question, and because the answer is yes, of course we want to stand by those values. We want to make sure that freedom is defended anywhere in the world, and we want to make sure that the folks who count on us for support can do so with the highest level of confidence.
Will our sanctuary city status stand behind the Ukrainian refugees that have settled in Ithaca if the worst comes to pass and Trump enforces the humanitarian parole, the elimination of the humanitarian parole?
Yeah, let me be unambiguously clear on this. The city will and has committed to stand by our protection of new Americans, undocumented Americans, and anyone who has sought refuge in our community. I've made some statements to the Washington Post and other places that really underscore that this is not just a value statement for us. This is a strong legal argument that is supported by the Constitution and the 10th Amendment. The United States government is more than welcome to prioritize the policies that it believes are important to serve the American people. Personally, if I were in Washington, I would urge folks to focus more on the cost of eggs and groceries than trying to demonize and persecute our friends and neighbors. But the federal government chooses to adopt a more hostile posture, they are welcome to attempt to enforce that on their own, but there is nothing in the Constitution that requires the state or the local governments to serve as an adjunct to federal policy, and we will continue to focus on things like paving roads, repairing sidewalk, keeping our community safe, and not trying to jump at shadows that the administration has decided are worthy of demonization.
I'm just wondering what the structure, what the framework might look like on a citywide basis.
Well, I think the answer there is that you're looking at a lot of important partnership between municipal agencies and the robust civil society network that we have here. And I know you'll be speaking later with some representatives of those organizations, but I really want to just lift up and commend the work they've been doing, both to welcome refugees, undocumented Americans and new Americans into our community, to help them integrate and feel welcome, but also educate them about some of the new risks that are posed by, unfortunately, our own government. And I think that there is a strong opportunity for us to help disseminate resources and information to those networks. We can have a bit of a positive feedback loop on how the situation might develop for folks. Keep them apprised of anything that we hear coming out of Washington. But I think we're really fortunate to be in a community where those resources and those personalities exist, where there are people who are passionate about taking care of their fellow human beings. And it's really important for us to recognize that this is just an example of a broader conflict that we're seeing on the world stage. And it's a question of, are we going to stand by our democratic values, our respect for human rights, our desire to see the world become a more prosperous and peaceful place? Or are we going to lionize strongmen? Are we going to demonize people who might have different values or beliefs than us or look different than us? And again, for me, it's an easy question with an easy answer. We are going to stand by the values that have been in this country since its founding, and we're going to try to recognize that there is imperfection everywhere, but our mission and our obligation to our constituents, as well as to our friends and allies around the world, is to stand up for liberty and try to advance that cause wherever we can.
Even in a small town like Ithaca?
Even, especially in a small town like Ithaca, because honestly, at the end of the day, it's not just Washington that matters, right? The decisions that are made locally help inform the conversation in the Southern Tier, in New York State, around the country. And it's really important for us to exercise our voice while we have it, because we've seen that there are forces out there that want to take it away.
Ithaca Welcomes Refugees partners with newly arrived refugees and immigrants who come to Tompkins County to rebuild their lives. So that can include everything from finding and helping pay for housing, enrolling children in school, helping people find jobs, connecting them with interpreters, with doctors, everything that someone who is newly arrived to the country and to the county who has little to no income would need help in order to rebuild.
Well, can you take me through the steps of the process, how you first get contact with an individual and how they are linked in with various members of the community that provide the support?
A variety of ways. So some people have sponsors. Anyone who's here on humanitarian parole would have a sponsor. Sometimes we're hearing from people through their sponsor. Sometimes we're referred by one of our partner organizations, Catholic Charities, or Open Doors English. And then once people do approach us, we then have an initial interview with them to assess their needs, and we assign a volunteer team of usually 2 to 4 people who will work on people on their self-expressed needs. So they can be very varied, but there are some common things that everyone usually needs, like referral to English language classes, referral to immigration law help, some of the other services I mentioned earlier, like connecting to doctors, interpreters, and things like that. And there's no typical trajectory. Some people arrive with housing, some people have no housing, some people have temporary housing, and we need to help them find permanent housing. And everyone also has different lengths of time until they're allowed to have work authorization. So sometimes people require support for a very long time, and sometimes it's quicker for people depending on what country they're from and what program they're here through.
Okay. Well, since we're discussing Ukraine in this program, is there anything significant or different in terms of helping to resettle the people that have come over from Ukraine?
So we have worked with 42 Ukrainian refugees since the start of the war. We're currently working with 22. And they are here on parole or temporary protected status, so they have sponsors. In the beginning of their resettlement, earlier in the war, people from Ukraine were supposedly given prioritization for processing their work authorization. But there were very many people also trying to get their work authorization at the same time, and people were waiting a year before they were legally allowed to work when they arrived here from Ukraine. Those processing times have sped up more recently, but that was a really big challenge. And we're fortunate to rely on some community partners. One church that we work with has rented leases to refugees on short-term leases since the 1970s. And we've been able to support them with rent payments there. It's reasonable. Community members have opened their homes to Ukrainian refugees and hosted people at no cost in their own homes. So this is a really welcoming community, and people step up in really big ways to help all of the refugees that we work with, and they did with Ukrainians as well.
Trump eliminating the humanitarian parole, you see as a direct effect in what services you're providing to people?
Absolutely. A lot of people that we are working with are really scared. So he's ended already parole for new people can't apply for parole. It remains to be seen, and for Ukrainians specifically, he's supposedly going to be deciding in April, the administration will, what they're going to do about Ukrainian humanitarian parole. So no one can apply for it, but people are still legally allowed to be here on it. But the worry is that the administration will abruptly say, no, you cannot wait even till the expiration of your parole, because parole is a temporary status, usually 1 to 2 years, and that is the fear that they'll say, your parole ends today, or 30 days from whatever day. And that does not give people a lot of time. There's also just a lot of uncertainty. The language written into these orders is, I think, intentionally vague, and probably because they're hoping people will just get so scared that they will self-deport. It's just a very scary time, and it's completely irresponsible and heartless, I think.
Do you have immigration lawyers that work with IWR?
Yes, we work with some immigration lawyers at Cornell Law School in an advisory capacity who have been very valuable, and I really am very appreciative of. I send them a lot of questions, and they send me a lot of answers. So it gives us a lot of clarity. It helps me know what to tell our refugee partners.
Ithaca's status as a sanctuary city is helping, or is it hindering the work that you do?
It's definitely helping, especially in this political climate. Knowing that our local law enforcement and our local institutions are deprioritizing cooperation with ICE is a really big relief at this time when people are very abruptly being criminalized, who did come to the country legally, have committed no crimes while they are in the country, and face real danger if they were to be sent back to their home countries. So it's a relief, and it also sends, I think, a strong message of welcoming and belonging.
Well, do you have anything else you'd like to add? What your organization is doing, or what your hopes are for the future?
We are trying to determine how best to support the people who we have welcomed over the past 4 years. We do anticipate a dip in arrivals. But we are deepening services to people who we've been working with, and we're really trying to concentrate on keeping them safe. We've done some Know Your Rights presentations. We're doing a family emergency preparedness presentations so that people know what to do with their children should they be detained or deported. So we're really focusing, taking things kind of flexibly and making sure that we can respond to people as the needs come up. And we do have a newsletter if anyone in the community wanted to be kept informed of what we are doing and wanted to lend their support. It's IthacaWelcomesRefugees.org. Sometimes you just need to stand up for what's right and risk that it puts a target on your back, but it feels like the right thing to do.
Our next guests are two distinguished professors from both Ithaca College and Cornell.
I have a PhD in Soviet history and East European history, particularly focusing on Soviet Ukraine in the 1920s, but also looking at legacy politics throughout the period and in the post-Soviet era. And another area I focus on is religion in the post-Soviet era and also human rights. This is among a number of different areas I study. I also used to coordinate the social studies teacher education program, so I've done a lot with how all of this can be translated into the high school classroom.
I was hired at Cornell to teach modern European history. That's a lot, right? So I've hit pieces of it over the way, and also with early writings, the history of technology. So I had the history of technology, then it went to European political and social history, modern European political and social history, 20th and 19th centuries, and then to the history of humanitarianism and human rights.
Well, we had two guests that were scheduled today, and they actually declined to come on because they were concerned about the exposure.
That's right.
And I wanted to bring this up first. In your experience, what is the climate out there now, particularly for people of Ukrainian background, to be able to speak out about these issues? Zenon, do you want to start?
Well, I'm connected with the Binghamton area community, and there's a humanitarian committee that I'm involved with that has sponsored refugees, 5 or 6 families. They've come in, housing was found, they have immediately found positions, they are self-supporting, they are part of the larger community, and the position is, well, look, we haven't cost the taxpayers anything. We're self-sufficient. There's a community that supports us. Why are we suddenly being targeted? And as the war is going on, it's still going on. So there is definitely concern about kind of a confusion as to why they are now being singled out, among other things. And it's true, people are very much worried because, as you were speaking earlier, come April, suddenly they might be told to leave.
Well, this U.S. policy seemed to have turned on a dime when Trump came into office. But can you see any precursors to this whole change of Ukraine being our ally, and now, with Trump's sentiment being more of Russia being an ally? What has built up to that, do you think? Is it just because Trump came into office, or was there other things?
Well, there were Republicans who were very supportive of Ukraine up until now. I think John might be better able to answer in terms of speculation, but I really do think with Trump coming in, the advisors he picked, and what's surprising, for example, is Rubio is trying to toe a line as well. But as a result of this, we're seeing that the European Union is very united. Zelensky was just in Paris. And so these actions by the US government has unified Canada, has unified the European Union, except for Budapest. But there are protests there as well. And kind of a civic action. You've been aware, Serbia, massive demonstrations against the government there as well. When I speak with people in Ukraine, part of the European Union, and Canada, they keep on saying, why are Americans not pushing back? And that's a tough one to explain, especially when we look at Congress, when we look at our elected officials. What do I tell them?
There's just been publication of stories, articles about something called competitive authoritarianism. Not quite the same as fascism, because elections happen. Otherwise, it's pretty close to a real dictatorship in the way things are carried out, the way things are done. And when the full force of government institutions is mobilized to do that kind of stuff, to suppress various kinds of people, to take their jobs away, and these kinds of things and so forth, then you really get the feeling you are in Germany in the 1930s. That's for sure.
As a reminder, the Ukrainian Euromaidan of 2014 was about Ukraine joining the European Union. And the foundation of the European Union, rule of law, democracy, human rights. And Ukrainians are still striving for this, and in a way, we can also see it's the Northern Europeans by far, by percentage, that are offering the most help. And if anything, it kind of reaffirms Ukraine's need to be part of a European community. In terms of the United States, there seems to be a modeling after Putin's managed democracy. We have to be concerned about rule of law.
I'm sorry, can you explain that a little bit? Managed democracy by Putin?
Well, you have the structure of governance, but it's all decided ahead of time. And you'll never see in the Russian Duma, for example, any resistance to what the policy has already been decided, meaning there are elections, but you know it's a foregone conclusion. There's a very controlled press because others have suddenly fallen off of balconies who did try to tell the truth. I really, and you know, when I was at a conference, at a meeting, a professional organization, and it's people who do Ukrainian studies, and their main concern was about the United States, not Ukraine. You know, why? And you know, drawing comparisons with the end of the USSR, because, you know, they're saying, look, when Russia invaded, all the experts are saying it's going to be over in 3 days, 2 weeks, and whatever. And a good part of the territory was taken away. You have a civil society, civil initiative taking place even right now. And the areas that are in the eastern part as well. There's some Ithaca peace activists who are saying, well, peaceful resistance. It happened in Kherson and they murdered people, meaning when the Russians took over. I mean, it's a criminal state. Genocide is being taken over. The New York Times is giving so many stories about what's going on. And then meanwhile in Washington, D.C., a small clique is saying, well, let's defund support for children globally, among other things. And so maybe I'm going off a little bit too far, but this is a major issue in terms of how the rest of the world looks at us right now.
If you look at the surveys, the very recent surveys in the 2020s and so forth, about interest in democracy versus willingness to accept authoritarian solutions, in other words, the authoritarian group, the people who will say it's okay if the government breaks a few rules to get done the larger stuff and so forth. In other words, an authoritarian solution, 38%, 37%, 35%. So in other words, and then you get a kind of uncertain patch of that and so forth, and then you get the democracy. Usually in those surveys, the democracy, I have the feeling somehow it is contrived. Anyway, come out about 51% of Americans will accept democracy.
With the current ceasefire, or the motions to a ceasefire, is there anything in Ukrainian-Russian history that we could hope for that this could be a successful event?
Lots we cannot hope for, right? Lots of records of the Russians of breaking ceasefires and so forth, that's for sure, yeah. No, you have to go back a long way, but, you know, it's a game the Russians are playing. It's pretty evident, to me anyway, that Putin has no interest in a serious ceasefire. He's put down conditions that are impossible or only favor him. If that kind of ceasefire is set in. And
well, Putin sees himself a historian, and of course he wants to come back to the 19th century, just like politicians in power now want to go back to the American Gilded Age, and we know who was in power then.
Right.
And so this kind of fantasy of recreating a Russian empire, not based on any democratic measures, but kind of this Ruski Mir, this Russian world, a mythical world, and kind of in the background you have, I would call fascist philosophers like Dugin and others pushing this forward, and also saying the state and the church, the Russian Orthodox Church, are working together with all of this. In terms of history, in 1654 there was a Pereyaslav agreement where the Ukrainian Cossack state had made an alliance briefly with Russia, and many Ukrainians will say the Russians never kept to that, among other things. One glitch, was the creation of the USSR. And under Lenin, they had to acknowledge Ukraine, and there was a Ukrainian Republic in the USSR with clearly drawn borders. And in the 1920s, they said ethnographically it should have been larger as well, but you had a huge increase in Ukrainian identity in the 1920s, and when Stalin came in, it was put down. With the referendum in December of 1991, over 90% of Ukrainian citizens voted for independence. It was kind of messy in terms of settling in, but it's a civil society, it's a civic identity. The president of Ukraine is of Jewish background, the military leader is of Russian background, the naval commander is of Crimean background, etc. And so it's not some kind of mythical nationalist identity, unlike what's going on in the Russian Empire. And there was always this kind of, and scholars were always wrong, believing that the eastern part somehow wants to be part of Russia, etc. You might speak Russian, but that doesn't mean you want to be part of Russia. Tell that to the Irish. Oh, well, you speak English, so that means you should be part of the United Kingdom. So, in short, not really.
Are you hearing anything from Ukraine as far as a sense of hope or a despair with this ceasefire? And is there a divide with Eastern and Western Ukraine as far as their approach to believing in a ceasefire?
Well, again, there is this kind of mythology of East versus West. What's surprising about Eastern Ukraine is people rediscovering their history. Remember, the people who are fighting are in the East. It's Eastern Ukrainians who put up the resistance. Russians are bombing Eastern Ukraine, and people there who I just met saying, why would we want to be with anyone who's killing us, among other things? And remember that the Black Sea, the Russian Navy has been neutralized there as well. On the other hand, people are exhausted. There's no doubt about that. And how do you, with polling, we don't want to give any territory away, but we're tired. And you've seen how civilian targets are being hit.
In the time we have left, let's talk about the coalition of the willing, the idea of Western Europe. Do we really feel confident that if worse comes to worse and America truly abandons Ukraine, that Western Europe can come together?
They've been optimistic about it in their meetings and so forth. And they're used to divided societies, divided party lists and party groups and so forth, so they can sort of handle that. And they watch a party that doesn't have the position of European unity much in mind, rise up, and they worry about that, and they have conferences worrying about that, and they're serious about that part, and so forth. Anyway, as far as a coalition of the willing, it's a device to make sure that the countries that are not so happy about this opposition to Russia and so forth, are dealt with in various ways. I mean, Zenon mentioned Hungary. And so some of the stuff that's put together, when you make your calculations in Brussels or wherever the European Union or the NATO is meeting and so forth anyway, they will indeed do that. They are thinking about trying to get together and have a separate army, a separate military force that is not NATO. And so they can sort of move that way. That's sort of a coalition of the willing in that way. And they put together the resources for that. They have that ready. So it's a sort of a confused issue in some ways, but I think it's fruitfully confused because I know that they can handle that. They're used to that.
And we have to be careful not to say Western Europe, Western and Central Europe. When you look at the position of Poland, very strong in support.
Absolutely.
And the European Union has a population of around 450 million. Hungary is under 10 million, and there are constant protests against the government taking such a neutral position in terms of Ukraine. But that's going to mean a big regearing of the European economy, militarization, and we'll see how that
Well, that's
works.
what I'm wondering is, in my knowledge, I don't know of Europe ever coming together for a central issue. Maybe when the euro came in, but I always got a sense there was a certain factionalism, and it sounds like they're really going to have to be unified if it comes down to it, where they're going to be supporting Ukraine.
There's a right-wing government in Italy, and Meloni's very supportive of coming together, and the Labour Party in the UK. And again, it's the Northern European countries that are offering the strongest moral support, and by GDP giving the most support as well.
Are the governments reflecting the will of the people?
Well, you see, you're asking, what frame are you asking that in? Are you asking assuming there will be some sort of consensus government, or you are asking, are they able to handle doing something in a divided country that they become used to, or at least they think can get somewhere in a country that has multiple parties that are all powerful and have to be taken into account. It's important to remember that there are other things they have found unity on, certainly in the economy, in the market, and in sharing the market. Started out with just France, Germany, Belgium, and Netherlands, and so forth, with the sort of exchanges, free markets, after all the disruption of the war, and then it gradually grew.
Any sense whether the fracturing, if that's too strong of a word, between Europe and the United States over Ukraine can be healed, or do you think this is a road to permanence?
Well, I don't think things are done in the United States necessarily. And when you look at polls, meaning polling figures, and the polls.
And the polls.
I'm sorry. People are still very supportive of Ukraine. And, you have a leader in the United States where you really don't know what's going to happen next, among other things. So
they always have to adjust for the worst possible case, and that's what they're doing now with Trump. Certainly the Canadians are doing that, and so forth. And their prime minister was telling them this is going to be tough, but nothing is going to stop us from responding to Trump as strongly as we can.
Well, the Canadians dealt with the War of 1812 when they were saying Americans invaded, and now there's a new invasion where people of all, and there are 5 major political parties in Canada that are unified in how to react to this. Right. And with the European Union, the citizens are pushing back as well. I mean, that's going to be a hit on our own economy in terms of goods and services.
So I believe our final question is, will Ukraine be able to find peace and still retain all its territory prior to the Russian invasion, the recent Russian invasion?
That is a very difficult question to answer because there are so many different parties negotiating. When you look at the far eastern part of Ukraine, the Donbass, it's basically pretty much a wasteland. But nonetheless, the people there did want to remain with Ukraine. I've run into so many people who are originally from Crimea, originally from Donetsk and Luhansk, and are saying, or with Crimea, that's the home of the Crimean Muslim Tatars as well. And so it's a tight issue because you have this unitary state. And so does this set a precedent? Well, why don't you invade a neighboring country and hold on? The reality, that's a tough one to figure out. So I didn't give you an answer.
One of the, I would give what you might call a technical answer to that. Because my experience has been, my Army experience has both in field artillery and in air defense artillery, shooting down planes and rockets and that kind of stuff. Okay. All right. And so what I've been interested in and following since the war began was the matter of the artillery shells and then the drones. But in particular, the artillery shells, and I've sort of imagined various hypothetical situations in which at a particular point, Ukrainians have more shells. They're not outnumbered 10 to 1 and so forth anyway. Or even they're only outnumbered 2 to 1 in some circumstances. And the drones are a different situation. They have produced a different kind of warfare. It depends upon how fast the Russians can learn to use them and so forth, as well as get support for them and get them built. Anyway, so that's it, and that's one of the factors that I'm watching, how fast it can go. So there are the artillery shells, and we have been totally remiss in producing them and so forth anyway, and America and so forth. To get another place to produce the standard 155 shell, we had to hire Turkish workers to come into Texas to build a plant to manufacture the shells. So that kind of stuff makes a difference. A lot of talk out there, a lot of hopes out there, a lot of ideas out there. But if more stuff is coming in on you than you can deal with and that you've learned how to deal with, you're going to be in bad shape.
Well,
so it's exactly what really produces.
Or this might trigger a revolution in Russia.
Now, all kinds of stuff like that. What could indeed? Oh boy, yeah.